Good afternoon. I'm looking for, I can see everybody in the room now. Good to see you all. I'm the disembodied head at the front of the screen. So I'm Christopher Woods, Head of Research Software Engineering at the University of Bristol. And I'm here now for this new panel on strategic thinking and visioning, where we're going to be trying to explore the role of strategic thinking and visioning both within organizational frameworks, so departments, organizations, and national, as well as its role in relationship with individual researchers and individual research groups. I've got a great panel here in front of me, which I can't actually see because they're tiny little dots in the far, like, below me, but I can see them in the distance. There we are, that's brilliant, I could see you there. So I can see Oz is it Oz sat on the far left? Yeah. So what we're going to do, I want to do introductions from Oz, moving across the panel to, I think that's a tiny dot, possibly is Ed. Yeah. There we are, from Oz to Ed. It's amazing how tiny it was on my screen, sorry for that. And what I want to do is introduce yourself, but also, as part of your introduction, could you also tell me what is your vision for your own organization and how did you come up with your vision?
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I'm Oz Parchment. For those of you who are in the room for the last one, I've not changed any since we last spoke. So I'm Associate Director of Research Computing at Cambridge. Do we have a vision? Yes, we do. Is it written down? Yes, it is. Do I remember the process of coming up with it, and can I share that vision? So I suppose our vision, we came up with that at an away day, and it was really pragmatic, I think, in the way we kind of formulated it, which was to kind of understand, what are we doing? What actually are we doing? Well, if you take all the big lumps of activity that we're doing, what does that kind of bring you to conclude is our vision? So it's almost as if we had an unarticulated vision and then trying to put that into words. Now, I'm not going to remember the exact wording that creates that vision because I have an away day next month, which actually is about to test that vision. But the vision really is essentially for Cambridge is to be one of the leading centres for high performance computing, AI, and data analytics in the world. That's kind of the overall vision. I'm going to stop there. And hand over.
Thanks, Oz. Katie Finch. I am newly appointed just last week as the Head of Research Software Engineering at the University of Exeter. So the vision, it's very early days. I'm not even in post yet. I have a vision for our group, which the group itself has only been in existence for about a year, just over a year now. And so, as you'd expect, that's about really embedding our group in the organisation. Continuing to grow, we are currently at 6 and we need to keep expanding that. So we've got a lot of work to do, and the stage of development we're at is about how we really raise the profile of these skills and these careers within our university. How we came up with the vision is absolutely wrapped up with the process of establishing the group itself, and had the strategic arguments that we made for needing this resource within the university, and all of those really were built upon a lot of background work done with our academic research community, and lots of examples, lots of evidence, and then, I won't go through the whole detail now, but building a case, and then aligning that to the evolving university strategy. We have a new VC at Exeter. She's got big ambitions. We are just going into a really major restructuring program at the university, and some key themes that are emerging, which we are going to have to align what we do alongside. Okay, I'll stop there. Pass on.
Thanks. So I'm Chris Jewell. I'm a senior lecturer in epidemiology at Lancaster University. And prior to the award of the BEAD grant, we didn't really have a research software engineering strategy at the university. We're a small university with the smallest of the N8. And so that gives us an opportunity to be quite agile, in the way that we implement strategies and look to the future. So With BEAD, we have our innate CIR software engineer, and together we've kind of put up what we think is a vision for software engineering and high-end computing at Lancaster, which involves really recognizing that although the university has a rich tradition in physics, everybody in physics knows how to use an HPC, right? Actually, we've got some really non-traditional users of HPC. We've got the stats group, who, again, have dabbled in high-end computing in the past, but aren't necessarily accomplished Unix users. But we go right through a spectrum through chemists and people working in health data science to arrive at people in the humanities who are now using high-throughput computing to analyze historical texts, a lot of natural language processing. So really our vision at Lancaster is to build from our one RSE to establish some initial training activities, focus on skills development, show the added value from having an RSE training people and helping on small projects to expand that to a small core of maybe 3 or 4 RSEs across campus embedded in departments. And in particular then to try and address the barrier that the SSH terminal presents to non-traditional HPC and HEC users, and actually try and engage our staff in Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, as well as in medicine, and to a certain degree in management as well, besides science and technology.
Hi, I'm Alan Reel. I'm surprised I can still remember my name at this stage of the week. But I'm Director of Advanced Research Computing at Durham University, and I'm also Technical Director of an HCR and the Director of the BEAD HPC service. So which one of those fine things should I choose as the thing that has the kind of vision on it? Okay, I'll go local. Okay, so we'll go with sort of my university kind of hat on here, and I think that in terms of a research computing vision for Durham, and I was very much brought in to kind of sort of define what on earth that is, and take the organisation on a journey with it. I think it's interesting, this like who is this vision kind of aimed at? Who's going to be taken on that journey? So I heard about Oz talking about being this centre that stands out, above, as a sort of a key point of reference. But actually, I think that we were very grounded in where that vision really came from, and it was all about responding to the need of kind of putting people at the forefront of computational practice within their particular area, and I would then say by doing whatever it takes, right, to kind of get people there. So I think and if it takes being a leading national centre to do that, okay, we'll do that. But as a consequence, we're actually there really, and we've got this kind of grounding to our vision, I think, that is really fostered in kind of making the research kind of being able to differentiate itself and do things it couldn't do otherwise if we didn't exist. Ed.
Thank you. So I'm Andrew Edmondson. I lead the research software group at Birmingham, as you know. I'm going to talk about that probably most of the time. I could talk about advanced research computing things, but actually it's probably easier for me to answer the questions from a research software group perspective. So like Alan, it's tiring at this end of the week, so I'll go for the easier version. When we formed the group 5 years ago, we sat down and wrote 4 goals, so I thought I'd read them out. Number 1, enable the University of Birmingham's research community to get the best from their research software. And as all good RSE groups do, we then cited better software, better research from the SSI. There's a wonderful paper, I'm going off piste slightly, there's a wonderful paper published a couple of years ago, I think it was the Office for Science one, that manages to have the opposite of that as a quote, which is kind of, you know, bad software, terrible research results, retract papers, everybody loses their jobs. But the positive version is what we put on the website. Number 2, provide specialist software engineering advice and support to researchers and RSEs across the campus. We're a central group, but there are other RSEs. Help to enhance the university's reputation for high-quality research. Very a broad one, but that is kind of why we're here. And number 4, help researchers get the most from BEAR services, where BEAR is the brand for our all of our research computing services, maximising the return on the university's investment in BEAR. So those 4 goals we wrote 5 years ago. I do think we need to update them, but how we wrote them was the 3 of us in the team at the time sat down and thought, what do we want to do? Why do we want to exist? What drives us from, you know, doing this job? What do we want? What drives us to do the job we have chosen to do? And I do wonder whether I've answered the question or not, because I know there's a lot of controversy around about what is a vision or a mission statement or goals or objectives and so on, but I'm going to say that answers the question.
Thanks, Jeremy. Off you go.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Jeremy Cohen. I'm an EPSLC RSE Fellow and Director of RSE Strategy at Imperial College London. From a kind of institutional perspective, I think the vision in the context of research that has a software and computational element is to provide the services and support that help to ensure that we can develop the highest quality, sustainable computational research outputs, offering reproducible results. And that's something which I guess is, you know, it requires a lot of input from a lot of people to be able to support that. And so at some level, this is still a work in progress. It's something that we're working towards across both the sort of RSE side of things and also the HPC and infrastructure sides. And I guess from the perspective of an RSE fellow, I see more of a kind of, again, I'm not sure if I'm falling foul of the difference in a vision and a mission statement, but I see more of a sort of aim to empower researchers to take advantage of the services and the infrastructure that's available to them through a range of training and community engagement activities, which again is something which I think, you know, making this kind of these links with the communication between different entities is something that's really important in supporting these visions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panel there. So you're all very confident at expressing a vision and you're very successful, you know, as strategic leaders in your organizations. Thinking back to school, I don't remember ever taking classes in strategic thinking and visioning. And so the question I have next is, well, how did you learn how to do this? How did you learn how to be a strategic thinker and someone with a vision? And I think another question is, when did you learn this? Now, again, I'll start from Oz and I'll move across the panel.
Am I going to get all the new questions? So I have no.
No, don't worry. I'll be random next time.
So, when did I learn? I suppose actually it was probably, I could probably give a date crudely, 2005 maybe. We had a new IT director come in who was all about strategic thinking and visioning and strategies and very excitable, but very nice guy, very excitable. And so I think that was when, you know, I started to understand some of the components around strategic thinking. I'm not entirely sure what we mean by strategic thinking sometimes. But yeah, I think 2005 when we started to look at strategies around where we wanted research computing to go as a means to an end. For the university, and what it takes to build a kind of a strategy, a business case, an ask of that it was significant for the organisation at that time. I think, you know, when we were thinking about that, the university itself had its usual kind of, and I think most universities do, there's sort of apple pie statements about how, you know, they're going to change the world, and that's kind of, you know, that's all very nice, but, you know, it doesn't really help you formulate something, a strategy. But yeah, 2005, there you go. And I don't know the exact date, but 2005.
Thank you. And so I'll move down to Katie. Remember, if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat.
think, again, I struggle with being able to pinpoint what I do or what I have done as strategic thinking, but I learnt some skills in this area, certainly, from my time with the research councils. I think I mentioned earlier that I used to do a job similar to Billy's role. And as a young, just fresh out of PhD, the person, I went to Swindon and was suddenly thrust into a role where I had responsibilities for a community of researchers, and I had to become their voice, their ears, with the senior decision makers in EPSRC. And I learnt from watching others, and I learnt from being very empowered myself, and really supported by that organisation to try things out and to go and communicate and engage really broadly. And I think that has been the key for me in strategic projects that I've led and delivered, is being able to really think around an area, have a really broad understanding of the landscape that I'm working in, and then being able to weave those sort of strategic arguments from that understanding. So I think it was probably started then, and then has been an element of all the roles I've done since. And I'm ashamed in some ways to say that I'm now become a bit of a business case specialist, and I find myself on an almost a monthly basis now in the university writing business cases and financial arguments for this, that and the other. And now it's just become a bit of a template thing that is in everyday life. I'll hand over to Chris.
Thanks. So I guess as a scientist, I'm a problem solver. And my interest in data began in 2001 up on Hadrian's Wall, just outside a place called Carroll Farm. Matt's smiling because he's heard me tell this story before. So I was training as a vet, and I was a third-year vet student, and in the foot and mouth we all got called up to bleed sheep. And to cut a very long story short, which I'll tell you about in the bar tonight if you're interested, I ended up working on the data systems up in the Disease Control Centre in Newcastle. And at that point, we had a Microsoft Access database that was trying to log paper workflows processing farms that had been infected, and we were mapping them. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could use this kind of database mapping to tell us which direction the disease is kind of spreading in, and then give us a little bit more heads up on where we should maybe focus our control, and then we wouldn't have to be quite so blanket about culling all these farms out, etc. So began an interest in data science, essentially, and then during my PhD I had a problem I needed to solve: how to use individual level epidemic models on populations of 200,000 farms, which, given the complexity of the algorithm, is a reasonably big data problem. So I had a problem to solve. I had to engage in high performance computing as somebody from a biological background, so I had a learning curve to undergo. And as my career unfolded through my postdoc and then through my lectureships, I've met other people who have similar problems and similar vocations towards their particular area of science. And I guess that started me thinking strategically, particularly about this idea of democratizing high-performance computing, using software, collaborating with software engineers to actually try and break down these barriers, and hence realized the importance of research software engineering as part of our subject. So yeah, that's my story.
Okay, so my story, and I guess it's like the perfect storm, right? Okay, where I think one of the thing that probably sticks out the most for me in here is actually one of the components of that storm was actually having a really good boss. And when I say, and this is like from somebody that's really rubbish at hierarchy and all these things, right? Just honestly, somebody who actually empowered me to think about what I could do and be and whatever, that sort of thing. And I used to sort of have my one-to-ones with this guy, and he'd say to me, well, you sort of get up in the morning and figure, just decide, what's the best way that I could spend the day, This was sort of like the kind of thing way you sort of deal with me. And then there was other people going to him, and sort of saying, right, I've done that task, what do I do next, sort of thing. But I was kind of empowered, but so he was always really, really supportive of everything. I was absolutely making these connections within the high performance computing community as somebody that kind of provided user support in these areas. And I really wanted to help that community, the research community at my current institution. Saw that there was zero investment at our site, lots of other investment at other sites, and clearly there was a disparity there that maybe I should think about helping out with somehow. In this time, I met people like Oz, right? Where through connections like the High Performance Computing Special Interest Group, and you end up, you think, well, maybe, and people are using this strategy word at you, like and beating you, around the head about it, and you're thinking this is this impenetrable thing, right? That I don't really know what this is. So they sent me on a retreat. Well, no, it was a jolly, right? It was a management training thing, right? Where good food, a hotel, ring any bells sort of thing. And actually they had all these senior people that rocked up, right? Vice chancellors, and it was one of these leadership forum things. And for the first time, it just unpeeled this thing, right? As a, actually this is seriously not rocket science, right? This is like, just planning your trip to work in the morning, right? In terms of, that's where I need to get to, right? Why do I need to get there, right? I need to get there so I go to work, right? So there's the why, and that's the end point, how are we going to do it? What are we going to do when we get there? I mean, it's like, this is not difficult stuff. So as long as I kind of convey those things in a document to people, or kind of make that case, talk to them about it, make it real, make them believe in my story, I can kind of do this. And so it was very much that kind of very encouraging, nurturing environment, and having a really good boss and a really good environment that I was in that created that perfect storm that said, actually, you can kind of do this.
It's hard to know what to add after this. I'm sorry for Jeremy, who's got to go after me. So you might end up concluding I don't know anything, but I kind of think I'm not totally sure what strategic means. My first job out of university, I worked for the Ministry of Defence, and they have a pretty clear definition of strategic versus tactical. But I don't think that's what we mean here.
Appropriate, hopefully.
And I think probably we really just mean longer term or bigger scale, don't we, when we say strategic? So learning to look up and not focus on exactly the one task you're doing right now, but planning your walk to work. If you do it one step at a time, you'll be knackered by the time you get there, won't you? So working out the route. But what I like to do, I think the easiest way to help other, actually it's a future question, I better not talk about that. So thinking longer term about where you want to be, I've had a couple of jobs that have really helped me learn how to do it. I was on a sort of management team for a small, medium company, and the CEO was incredibly keen on spending as much time as possible sitting in meetings discussing strategy. I think that's because that was his job, so he thought the best way to do that was to have 7 other people sit in the meetings with him constantly. So I spent a lot of time now, and I car shared with a management consultant who was really good at training people how to do things like think strategically and so on. So I picked it all up from other people, which is basically Alan's story about you find a good boss or somebody who knows about it and they've taught you how to do it. Is that still the question we're on?
Yes, it is still the go. I'm just letting you go. It's been fantastic so far. I'll let Jeremy give his sort of answer, and then we'll move on to another topic.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So as Ed just said, I think I'm kind of very reluctant for my answer to be simply a summary of what everybody else has said. But I do want to pick up on a couple of the points because I think they're very relevant to what I was going to add. And I mean, I think as researchers and as RTPs more generally, we are, I think, many of us are generally problem solvers, and one of the areas around sort of thinking strategically is you've got a challenge, you want to find a way to solve it, and there's this sort of drive to try and do that in an effective way. And so, I guess from a personal perspective, a lot of my experience where I've sort of learned about how to deal with these kind of things and to build up strategies around these sorts of things has been just from the experience of working particularly in large kind of multidisciplinary software focused projects where you get to see the different ways that people from different domains tackle problems and different challenges that are faced, and the ways that people try to address those. And I guess the other thing to highlight is that, of course, that having a strategy is great, but the way that plays out in practice may not actually be the way that you expected or intended. And so, often, you can do things that don't work out as you thought. And sometimes, I suppose, building effective strategies is actually a result of doing something that didn't work as you thought, perhaps failed, and you have a rethink and you try it again. So, I guess that's something which is a great way of learning, is to have those ideas, see how they play out in reality, and then to kind of learn from those experiences. And I think obviously it was pointed out that there's issues around having a really good manager or boss or supervisor who can provide the support. I think that's really important. But also, of course, events like this, but also more generally, kind of communities and discussions, I think that you can have with people from lots of different areas make a really big difference in understanding how strategies are viewed by different domains, particularly within the scientific community or the research community, and how those can be addressed. So I don't know if I've added a huge amount to what other people have said, but that's it from me for this one.
I'm definitely hearing that strategy is something that we're learning kind of, I would say on the job, I think is what I'm hearing from all of the panel, but it's also from a key person or key people who've basically helped teach us, whether it be a good boss or a mentor or somebody you kind of followed, which is a topic I will come back to in a sec, but I have heard that we do have a question from the floor, so I'm going to ask for that question to be read out.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I read a remark from James on that topic, which is, I was taught one of the best things to do when planning or making strategy is converting problems into tasks. And then the next question, where had I had this question? Let me scroll up. So who are these visions for? Who's reading the documents that are written, and is anything done with them?
So I think for this question, since Katie has mentioned that she's basically writes lots of business plans, maybe Katie, if you could start with the answer for this.
Well done.
Yeah. Thanks. Can I just pick up on the first comment that Marion read out, if it's okay, and then I'll come back to that, the trickier one. So the converting problems into tasks thing, I'm massively on board with that. So a personal passion of mine is facilitation and facilitation skills, and so that's something that, again, I've picked up over the years and that I've had some training in, and something that we do quite regularly as facilitators when working with a group of people. Ask about the problem, so you identify the problem, and then you get a group to start and with however you're doing it, sticky post-it notes, and you ask everybody in the group. You start the post-it notes with, at the top, you write down what you do is. So you've immediately converted the problem statement into a solution focused in your mind. So I think that's really helpful. It's really powerful, and it's now something that I do a lot myself. So rather than getting stuck in this problem, oh God, this problem, oh God, this problem, what you do is. And the first what you do is that I'll write down, I throw away because they'll be rubbish. But then the next couple come, and it slowly gets better. Coming on to the tricky bit, the visions, who are they for? Who reads them? What do we do with them? The corporate answer, I suppose, would be that they are for us to share their management documents, their team building documents, their group documents. They are things that everybody needs to understand and know, to understand where the group is going, their place in it, and how they contribute to that. Could I hand on heart say that I do that? Do I refer back to my own vision documents, either in my team that I run now or that I've worked in the past? Not that often. I'm probably quite lazy at doing that. However, I think just the process of going through, especially co-creating a vision as a team or as a group or as an organisation, is really powerful. And I'm sure it's good practice to go back and then also think about within the vision, what was the goals we set ourselves, how are we doing against those. I prefer to go through a process of evolution personally, and I think the vision is the big thing that you're heading towards, and yes, it needs refreshing and we should come back to that, but I think it's probably better as a live document rather than a management tool at the end of every quarter or what have you. It's something that it's something that should be so natural that it's with us in what we're doing the majority of the time anyway. Okay, I'm going to stop there and I'll give someone else a chance to go at that one.
That's fine. Does anyone else on the panel like to have a go at answering that question?
So I'm going to jump in and say something ridiculous. Okay, so to some extent, you know, these documents exist to feed the machine, right? They got to exist because they got to exist. But I think in terms of this vision and that, you know, the important thing is that the articulation and really who are you trying to convince or take on the journey. And you know, so my team will tell you that I can write like the most corporate statement describing the research computing function within Durham, which is completely meaningless, and it's so off-putting to anybody, you know, in terms of, you know, apart from like the senior administration that goes, oh yeah, I kind of get every single word there and all together, it's all fine, it looks like the right sort of thing. But actually it really depends on the audience. I think in this area of research computing, you're trying to take all sorts of people from different perspectives kind of with you on that, and really, no matter what that kind of core principles or anything is that's sort of underpinning it, you've got to kind of do this translation and make it relevant within that space. Otherwise, nobody is going to be on your side. You're never going to get something through as kind of a sole investor with just like an idea. You've got to kind of use this as a way to kind of get a whole consensus going, the consultation process, all that in a way that they feel part of it. You know, and I think that's probably what I'd say around who is it for. They don't exist as a sole thing that just does a job. It's a whole kind of, you know, groundswell of thing.
I think that's a really good answer. It's about what you say, it's getting all of the ships in a row. I think it's the thing people always say, it's everyone's on board, we're all pointing in the same direction, moving towards the same outcome. Any other answers for this question? Because I have another topic I want to move on to. Cool. So you've all talked about how you've kind of learned your strategic thinking, kind of your leadership skills, your visioning, kind of on the job from more senior people. Thinking about the future leaders, the future managers of advanced computing centres, RSC groups, divisions, etc. What are you doing to support others to learn these strategic thinking skills, these visioning skills? And what are you doing to try and make sure that those skills are going to a more diverse group of people so that we can have more diverse leadership in the future? And I'll start off with Ed. I'll hit you first with that.
Thank you. Well, the first answer is individual career discussions. So I talk to everybody in my team because I currently line manage everybody in my team, which is not a long-term solution, so I need some strategy around how to get out of that. But I talk to everyone in my team, and it's PDR season right now. And they fill in their paperwork and bring it along, and we start discussing it. And I always like to, relatively early on, turn to the box that says, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Relatively often, I find myself sort of interrogating what they've written and helping them to write something considerably better than what they've written. Because the answer shouldn't be, you know, I don't know, or I just want to be doing this job still, or whatever. You've got to think, where do you want to be? Because if you don't know where you want to be, you can't possibly plan how you're going to get there. And so everybody in my team gets a reasonably long discussion over a cup of coffee at least every 6 months, about what is their long-term plan and how are they thinking about getting there. And then more sort of task-focused as well, whenever there's a project. Even if you're in the world's most agile development methodology, you still need to have some understanding of where you want to be and how you're going to get there. So discussing each project with the people on the project and trying to get them to think about it strategically. Although I probably wouldn't say that to them, I would just say, how are we going to do this project? Over.
Well, Alan, would you like to have a go at answering that?
I could give you a really quick answer, right, which would be, hey, we all turned up here, right? In terms of, this sort of, thing is really important in our community, and I think that just scheduling this sort of session, having something that really addresses this particular DRI context and the sort of leadership qualities that are needed, and trying to kind of open people's eyes that this actually shouldn't be as scary as you may think it is, or step outside your comfort zone, challenge yourself. These things are all, really important things that we're trying to develop within here. But and that's doing it on the kind of large kind of scale. I think that bringing it down kind of to the part, I would echo what Ed really says there. It's like that kind of personal empowerment, and kind of giving people to kind of take control of their own kind of destiny, really, and figure out their own path, and give them more and more opportunity to sort of think in this way and just be accountable for those things, the decisions that they make. And I think that I think that that's really what we're sort of trying to do, I think, within our own area. So I'll pass over to Chris or whoever.
Yeah, I can counter that with a couple of comments, I suppose. One is that I think the idea of permanently underwriting research software engineers within academia is absolutely central to this, actually, because if you're on soft money and you're on kind of year-long contracts, 3 years at the most, maybe, I think it's quite difficult, given the current kind of RSE. We're obviously heading in the right direction, but I don't think we're there in terms of having solid RSE career progressions within academia. So it's quite important to give our up-and-comings a really stable platform from which to build on their careers and look to the future. And the other thing, I think, again, going back to the kind of the sort of line management thing, is I try to encourage those who I line manage to be really honest about what they're interested in, what really gets them out of bed in the morning, and then to play to those skills. Because often, management, zeitgeist, call it what you will, pushes people off down a direction where they're perhaps not really that invested, but feel they ought to go. And I think we should be asking people to back off that and to follow the things that they're absolutely passionate about.
Could I chip in?
Just on that, just quickly, sorry. There's a question I thought I have interested in the panel in general. Obviously, a lot of you started from a technical background. How much do you enjoy the management, or how much is it you want to do the management and the strategic visioning and the leadership side?
We hate the paperwork and all that kind of stuff, but I think that seeing the fruits of your labour in terms of seeing people develop and thrive and make a real impact, and then they give you this evidence that they really matter, and then you can build a case for them and kind of champion them and shine a light on them. That is amazing, watching people thrive in those kind of ways, and it really makes my day.
Oz, how about yourself?
That's an interesting question. So the last technical stuff I did, I'm just trying to think actually when that was, probably about 20 years ago. Do I enjoy the management part? Yes, I do. For many of the reasons that kind of Ian talked about. It is about being able to... I remember somebody who turned out to be, I think is a CIO now at a university in Scotland. And I remember him saying to me, 10, 15 years ago, long when he was still a kind of senior engineer. And I asked him, well, why do you want to be a manager? Why the hell do you want to be a manager? He said, because I want the power to change things. That's really an interesting view of the world, right? Because I've never seen management about being power. I see management about enabling something to happen rather than having the power to make something happen. So, I think that's coming from two different sides of the world. I mean, he's doing very, very well for himself with that kind of vision. But yeah, I think I do enjoy creating things, creating groups, creating people, right? Because you are kind of shaping and forming your kind of your colleagues as they go through. Right? So that is enjoyable. The technical side, I think you still have that little part of your technical brain that twirls from time to time, and you are kind of interested in what's going on. But I'm not looking at a command line. I'm not giving any application performance issues going on. But I think actually, yes, you do drift off and get your kicks in other ways. I think I will take issue with one comment that came up with Ed. Maybe not take issue, but perhaps give another view of when you ask people, where do you want to be in five years? I think most people haven't even thought about that as a question, right? And that's actually okay. It's okay not to have a view of where you want to be in 5 years. I think if you'd asked me, 2005, where do I want to be in 5 years? And I'm pretty sure my boss probably did ask me that question at the time. I have no bloody idea. Right? None at all. And the reason why was because, I was relatively content with where I was. I could see I had a direction of travel that was good enough. I didn't have any real ambition outside of the current direction of travel. But it would have felt kind of passé to say, I want to be the director of IT, or I want to be a CIO, that was the career track one was clearly on, but it wasn't necessarily a positive decision. I think that comes back to what Alan says about you've got to be careful of what you wish for, right? And why I think that saying I don't know is a perfectly valid response, because with that person that they will go away and they will start thinking about these things, and I don't need it down on the PPDR for it to be different to that. So I think you've got to give people space and time to become what they're going to become, which is why for me a PPDR is an everyday occurrence. I have weekly one-to-ones with people who report to me, and that is their PPDR. I don't need to write down a bit of paper. The PPDR is that meeting understanding who they are, understanding what they're doing, what they're going through, and then kind of coming through with their own thoughts about where they want to get to. That's a development process. It's not a paper exercise from my perspective, anyway.
Cool, thank you. Katie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, Ed, I've jumped across, but it was building on the, how do we support others to develop strategic thinking skills, I guess, and experience. And something I think is really important is that we get away from this tendency of keeping certain types of management or strategic information at the senior leader level, and thinking, I won't burden the team with all this other stuff that I've heard in this thousands of meetings that I have to go to. But actually sharing that and understanding that they need to understand the broader context. They need an awareness of the broader context at a level that's appropriate, so that they don't become disheartened by it, perhaps. But sharing that is really important. And a specific example, the universities as businesses, as we now know them, and the importance of, I believe, everybody on the research side, whether that's research infrastructure or as researchers, in understanding the drivers on the education side and what the other parts of the university are doing, and the importance on having an excellent student experience, and what good NSS scores for the university mean, and how what we can do in our little part of the organisation can contribute to those really big drivers. Because fundamentally, when it comes down to writing a business case, I'm sorry to use that word again, if you can show how you're benefiting, how you're adding value to the key things that the university cares about at the highest level, then it makes those arguments so much easier and you'll be more successful.
Cool, I'll come across to Ed, and I apologise, you are not on my screen, so I can't see you.
No, that's okay. you know, I can always say something about everything, but it may not be the most valuable thing to listen to, so it's fine, I'm happy. What do I want to say? That was several minutes ago. I don't remember that one. But I will say, I think I probably, to at least a good degree, agree with Oz's disagreement with me, which may be useful for everyone to know. I think the concept of the paper exercise of this obviously is bad, and if that was the reason, that would be a problem. I like PDRs because they force me to have the conversation with the people and force them to think about the conversation. I agree with you entirely that I'm fine as I am right now is a very good answer. But one thing you said in there I think is really useful and worth echoing, which is people will then go away and be thinking about it. And what you want is people to be thinking about where they're going. I don't think I've got anything else to add at this point.
That's cool. I'm sure that what's been said so far has obviously hopefully sparked some questions from the audience, and I believe there is one, but if there are any more, please do put them in the chat or put your hand up.
So just while the microphone comes, I was just going to kind of anecdotally kind of sort of comment upon the thing of Oz's, which is, well, I'll go back to my great boss that I had, right? I used to go in his office, and it was like the anti kind of aspiration kind of thing that he used to give me, and he used to say, oh, like, you know, I'm envious of you because you can enable all these changes and all these various things, because, you know, he obviously saw that I was inspired to do various things. Whereas because he was part of the sort of the middle management of the organisation, once you get to my career stage, you don't really have any kind of influence on what you really do. I can't really make any changes. I've just got to keep things kind of running and doing. It felt like it was sort of like, it was one of these weird things where almost like, be careful what you wish for sometimes, because if you just solely go into management because it's the expected thing to be doing, then you may end up in the wrong place that you actually feel totally moribund by it.
That's a career paths question.
Yeah, I think that is a risk. So do we have a question from the floor?
Yeah, hi. So Katie did start talking about this a little bit, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about how the vision and strategy of your teams aligns with like the research program or the education program of your institutions, and how much you can either leverage or avoid that, and if you think it's a good or a bad thing, what's your relationship with that, and how do you work with the higher level?
Shall I have a go? Right, okay. So, yeah, I mean, obviously I think there's a kind of, you've got to get in research computing, you've got to get the groundswell of people that are kind of invested in this kind of thing. And, you know, I think that sometimes, I mean, it's pressing the right buttons and figuring out what those buttons actually are, and how that then is heard within the senior kind of executive or whatever. So I think that, you know, so the first thing is you kind of got to figure out what the university's, the organization's risk register looks like a little bit. I think that's a really, you know, because once you know what that looks like, and then you kind of cast your, you know, you can kind of use, when we say our organizations are risk averse, right, what we actually mean is you should use your university's risk register in order to enable the changes that you need to see, right? So, you know, and there's a whole load of research-related risks around reputation, or sort of, you know, I can't remember what Durham's is, but it's probably pretty similar to most people's in this area. And so that's what they see when you say a risk-averse organisation, and trying to play those in terms of the business cases and things really resounds with people in terms of future protection and that kind of thing. You know, there's obviously like superstars, like they'd hate to lose particular superstars within the organisation, and making reference to those things. And I think, and then a lot of the senior people quite like to, you know, they don't like to be the first mover at particular things maybe, and if you can point it somewhere over there. Our case was Birmingham and Durham. Was about the sort of size of their operation or whatever, and you do benchmarking, right? And then you're seen as, you know, competitive and those things. I mean, you know, yeah, these are all necessary evils, but essentially, but it's, you know, whatever it takes to enable those researchers that you're actually trying to, you know, help differentiate themselves. And so that's kind of how that all interoperates, but you're telling a different story in different places, but it's the same common theme.
Yeah,
Does anyone like to come in on that?
I can comment from a Lancaster point of view. So we find actually that thinking about, you know, building up our own strategy around research software engineers and obtaining impact through methods translation, that kind of thing, actually aligns really, really well with an increasing number of university staff wanting to move their teaching into kind of digital platforms. We've had a few requests for things like virtual clusters, virtual HPCs to be set up within our VM cloud to teach third-year undergraduates mostly how to use grid systems. We've had a strategy throughout the pandemic when students, you know, obviously were sent home to provide virtual machines via a web browser to serve out all the kind of standard softwares that we teach our students. And we've had to cobble that together from, you know, various kind of industry software engineers and people hanging around our computing services. But, you know, if we'd have had a very core of software engineers who we could have gone to and said, okay, guys, we need to build up a strategy over the next kind of 18 months to enable our teaching programs to be delivered online, that kind of thing, I think that would have actually really benefited us. The risk there, as Alan was saying, was that, you know, our teaching would fall apart. It didn't, as it turned out, which is definitely a good thing. So I think, you know, it goes hand in hand with research-led teaching and this responsibility that higher education has, not only to do research but to train people whilst doing that research. I think it just goes hand in hand. It's a very natural extension of the research into education.
Cool. So thinking back to how you were learning how to be...
Chris, sorry, can I just add something? I just wanted to be kind of... I want to add something on to what Alan was saying about, you know, how, you know, there are three points you must touch, right? One, yeah, the risk, it's fine. Two, what everybody else is doing. But I think you can't forget the kind of positive aspect of what you're trying to put, the push in these kinds of strategies. It has to be something more than that, right? And oh, by the way, yes, I'm also addressing all this other crap that you're having to worry about. But, you know, this is the vision I'm pushing for you to do more, to be better, to be greater. So I think you have to think about it in three directions. You do have to address their concerns. You do have to look at what the rest of the world is doing. But also you've got to give them something unique to hold on to, I think, as well, something positive that pushes it. And I think that, you know, you have to figure out what kind of balance your organisation needs, I think is also important. Sorry, Chris.
I think that's a very valid point. Did someone want to come in?
Sorry, Chris, it was me. I was just going to say that I completely agree with that. And I tend to think of what Oz was just saying in terms of the need. And it comes back to the grant writing that we were talking about earlier. I always start with what is the need? What's the thing that either doesn't work now, needs to be improved, or that we don't have? And then the clearer the argument, if I can say it in one sentence in a way that senior leaders in the university are going to get instantly, then I know it's a winner.
Cool. So you've all been, again, showing how great you are at basically having these strategic visions, and you talked about how you were learning from people, you know, you worked for. To take a question that's come in online, many of the panelists have talked about their own manager or community. To what extent do they look to other teams and to outside to learn how to have strategic vision and to move forward? And I think maybe if I go to Jeremy to start with this question.
Yeah, so I think, you know, from my perspective, more rather than as a team leader, but more as a community leader, I think this idea of kind of developing communities and kind of bringing in different perspectives and different views through that kind of community model is one really great way to kind of learn more about you know, the different approaches that people have and the different ways that people tackle these kind of problems. And I think, you know, particularly in the previous question, you mentioned about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the sort of DRI side of things. And I think, again, that's an area where, if you're talking about this in the context of your own team, then obviously there's a huge amount of things you can do to support your own team. But if you want to kind of broaden and give opportunities for more people to get involved and get engaged, then you need to be potentially looking more widely and bringing in that kind of community aspect, and giving people the opportunity to sort of to get involved and to get engaged. So I think that's an area where looking out to what other people are doing and what's happening, and also the reverse of that, actually taking your ideas out to other people, giving other people the opportunity to learn from and to build their skills in this space, so that as you move forward, you're also developing the kind of next generation of people who want to also kind of get engaged in this space, and who have those skills such that they can then help to impart those skills into the next generation of people coming through, to sort of build that kind of pipeline. Yeah.
Let's got any responses to that? Any other answers from the panel?
I think the community is really important. I was basically groomed by Oz, I think.
Don't say that.
Yeah. We could have a video.
Quite the words you're on.
But I think that, having a community, say like HPC SIG, at that point in my career, and having people that were in the same position as me that I could basically use as mentors, and to kind of see what they're doing and what works, what doesn't work for whatever reason. I think those are those were pivotal for me to be able to be kind of sitting and doing whatever I'm doing right now.
Yeah, and I'd agree 100% with Alan. I mean, one of the driving reasons for setting up the HPC SIG so many years ago was to create that network, that environment where we all had the same problems. We all had slightly different approaches to those types of problems, and it was a real eye-opener, I think, so many years ago to step out from this little silo world that we'd all been in our own little individual institutions, to talk honestly and openly with your peers around the country who were having exactly the same problem, exactly the same issue. So suddenly you weren't alone. So I think building these communities of practice, or communities, DRI communities, whatever you want to call them, and having the ability to discuss with your peers, your ways of working, your methods that you found work, what doesn't work for you. I think that's really invaluable. I genuinely think that's invaluable for building your career. Absolutely invaluable.
Can I just come in there and say, actually, I feel a bit of an interloper this week, because I was tasked to write my research computing strategy this week. So if I've talked to you and garnered bits of knowledge, thank you very much, and it's all now built into it. So it's been, it's been very eye-opening, I think, particularly over the past kind of couple of years, where perhaps we've all headed slightly off in our different ways, to actually sort of come back and see good examples of best practice, and actually using that to sort of play back to our other institutions. So yeah, I agree very much with the comments from the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that as well. I think it's the same thing that I've heard as well. When I found the RSC Leaders Network to be massively valuable. And one thing I was told was, once you've climbed up, your job is to help those following after you and make it easier for those following after you. And I think we've heard that echoed, I think, through most of the panel's answers to this question. So I wanted to move on now to a slightly different subject. So how does your autonomy, or lack of autonomy, affect your vision and strategic planning? I'm going to start with Jeremy, and I'm going to work backwards along the list.
So I think for me, autonomy, and I guess as an RSE fellow, I probably have more autonomy than I might have in many other roles in this space, has been hugely important. I think it's given me the space to be able to think about new ideas, to be able to develop new ideas, and to be able to develop aspects around the kind of strategy. I guess the flip side of that is that sometimes autonomy limits your ability to actually apply some of those ideas and to actually make a difference practically. So I think it's something where having the space and the opportunity to kind of think in a sort of unencumbered manner without having to be actively involved in managing potentially a large team and the challenges that come with that is something that's very important. But I don't know whether it's something in hindsight whether it would be a choice, or whether actually there's something that you can be in a better position where you've actually got more of a chance to actually actively make a difference. And sometimes that can be done through leading a team and developing a team and having the scope to kind of build that up and have the conversations with other elements of the institution and other groups around the institution that you will have as a result of the tasks that are involved with building and sustaining a team. So from a personal perspective, as I say, I think autonomy has been hugely beneficial, but I can see pros and cons to that.
Cool. Ed, you're next.
Okay. So I want to talk about the importance of building your autonomy, because I really value being allowed to get on with stuff and making decisions and doing things without having to seek permission all the time. And the way you do that is by having your people who do have the oversight trust you. So we have an oversight structure that goes up to the PVC for research. We have a line management structure that goes up to the CIO. And I make a lot of deliberate kind of Machiavellian decisions about making sure that they hear good things. So the PVC for research will believe what well-respected senior professors tell them about our service. So we make a good effort to make sure that we look after the well-respected senior professors and they get a good service, and then they will report that back. And then we get to make decisions that make sure we can give a good service, rather than decisions that mean we have to attend 74 meetings every week and never have any time to do it. The other thing that I would really encourage everybody to do, the two flip sides of a coin I would really encourage everybody to do is, if you hear that a different institution is doing something well, and you meet someone senior from that institution, tell them you've heard they're doing something well. So if you meet the PVC for research from Birmingham, or the CIO from Birmingham, tell them you've heard Birmingham does this stuff really well. If you believe that, that's okay. But it's really helpful. The good word from someone respected from another institution is worth like 50 good comments from people inside your institution. And if you get to a position where the people in authority think you're good at it, you can do loads of good stuff.
I hear the beginnings of a mutual, recommendation network forming.
This is why I make an annual report.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, like what autonomy is here, right? So, I was brought into Durham, to do a job, right? And based upon the fact that in a previous organisation, I built this thing, and I was perceived as knowing how to do the job, right? And so, when my boss, the PVC for research, basically, first day was like, well, you know what to do. I don't really know. You just got to do this thing because we're in the right state. So can you please just get on with it? And so what absolute autonomy I had, but that came with huge responsibilities, around actually making sure I didn't screw up, right? And I could have seriously, made some bad choices. And as I say, the first couple of years of being at Durham was basically, I've been flown in by the management and need to just prove that I'm not evil. And that, it takes a bit of doing, right? So I think that, yes, we can say, yeah, I have complete autonomy, but I have like my own, sort of limits to that, and extents that I really push it, because I know that I might risk reputation if I straddle beyond particular points. But I'm just really fortunate that, the direction that is kind of my moral compass kind of aligns with all the things which, kind of the way I want to be doing things, and it's kind of working out. And so I'm really lucky. Fingers crossed, rock and roll.
Cool, Chris.
So, I guess I'm a little bit the same, actually. So, before I was at Lancaster, I was at Massey University, and in New Zealand and helped, again, trying to solve a problem, helped to lead Massey to join the National eScience infrastructure over there. So I sort of have prior experience of doing a bit of leadership within high performance computing strategy, and that was why I got into this role at Lancaster. But I'm an academic. I'm not a member of professional services. My time is split between teaching, a large amount of research, larger than usual at the moment, and then a bit of admin. And so actually finding the time within that framework to go and have the conversations with different researchers in different parts of the university to kind of unpick computing needs, particularly with academics who have computing needs but don't quite know what those needs are in some sense. I find that quite challenging. But I'm really lucky to have a really supportive head of information systems at Lancaster, who's very invested in getting our ISS involved in research and supporting research. And that means that I kind of get given the autonomy to do the strategic thinking, and maybe even a little bit of tactical thinking as well. You know, what are our objectives along the way? But I get an awful lot of help with the paperwork from people like Katie's counterpart and that kind of thing. So I find it important to make sure that I keep talking to our professional services. We were kind of asked a bit of a sideways question a little bit earlier about how do we bring in external help to help sort of develop our individuals at Lancaster. One thing we do really well is we have something called the Bonnington Leadership Programme, which is something where mid-career academics and mid-career professional services people come together for a mutual leadership programme, and it sort of lasts throughout the year. We get to know each other really well, which is really important for the sort of holistic functioning of the university, and really leads to this kind of mutual support from kind of more management-y things, administrative things, professional services things, into kind of the academic kind of research strategic thinking, I guess.
That sounds like a very valuable programme. Katie, what would you like to say about autonomy and how that relates?
So my RSE group sits in a structure like others, and you know, we have, when we do our strategy and our planning, we have to sit within and align with the kind of the broader structures that we sit in. I think outside of that, though, I have always found and still find that autonomy over ideas is completely freely given, and I've pushed that to the limit, probably. Back again. And I found that even if, you know, financial autonomy can be the most difficult thing, I have a feeling we're going to come on to that later, but outside of financial autonomy, I've always been encouraged to go beyond my delegated authority if I feel that it's the right thing to do, and if I have the right plan, a well thought through evidence plan, and to come forward and, you know, bring the ideas, bring the strategic input, bring the visions, and that's always been really welcome. So I don't know, I guess I don't know if I don't believe in a lack of autonomy. I guess it's just something that I've always not let that be a barrier. That maybe sounds ridiculously idealistic, but that's been my experience.
Cool. Oz.
So autonomy, well, lots of good stuff have been said. I think, you know, so I'm not going to push particularly on any of those things. I think, you know, one of the more interesting items is that I found over the years is that you have less autonomy the further up the pole you climb, basically, because you become more and more visible, and your actions, you know, if you're managing research computing services, your actions, there are reputational issues you might get involved in, and that's fine. They're very high cost, but you know, from a financial standpoint, you're, you know, touching maybe 0.1% of your university's turnover. You break, okay, we'll live with that. But clearly, as you begin to move up that pole, you are touching far more areas of the organisation, and autonomy, interestingly, starts to kind of, erode, really, which is quite interesting. And I don't know if it starts to erode because you're beginning to realise what impact you can have, and therefore you become much more collaborative with the people around you to make sure that that your decisions aren't impacting on them in negative ways. Or it is because you're just far more visible now and you're constantly in a spotlight, and therefore you have to ensure that that you have almost your people backing you up when you make these quite wide-ranging decisions. I think autonomy kind of cuts both ways. I like what Alan said there, that effectively, when you have that level of autonomy that you've always wanted, you also realise that you've also got this massive level of responsibility to direct it sensibly for the benefit of the organisation. So it does become a double-edged sword, right? There is a lot to be said by being unempowered and hidden under a carpet. That has its benefits, but if you want power, to my mind, you want power, you take the responsibilities as well, and that can be quite expensive for some people.
I like the way we're all avoiding the Spider-Man quote there. So I'm sure this must have prompted some questions from the floor. Do we have any questions in the audience? I'd see silence. I'm sure this must have prompted a question from the floor. Somebody brave enough to ask something.
They're all busy writing their strategic plans.
Oh, this is so terrible. But in that case, since it was sort of trailed, with great power comes great responsibility, but your responsibility your power is always limited by money, and money tends to be the great limiter of all things. So to what extent does funding or financial backing affect the development of your strategic plan? And since Katie, you raised this, I'll come to you first.
That's silly of me. Yes, well, fundamentally it does, because we have to report, we have to live within our means. I should explain the situation we have at Exeter. We're very fortunate that we have underwriting for our RSEs from the university. Hard won, but now that we have that in place, it gives us an excellent degree of stability. To grow the group, we have to continue to make those arguments, though. So we have to, if we want new posts, we have to go back with business cases year on year, and continue to make the arguments, and also ensure that our reporting and our monitoring and fundamentally the cost recovery is supporting and bearing out what we said we would deliver. And so what extent does the funding affect the strategic planning? Because it's not a case of using what funding we already have, I guess I'm always thinking about how are we going to build the case, evidence the need going forward. And so it means that maybe we have to work in a slightly piecemeal fashion at the moment. I hope that's perhaps not always the case. I think on a daily operating planning type level, financial autonomy, delegated financial autonomy, so that we can do the things we want to do within the sphere that we work in, to be able to develop our RSEs, to be able to do the skills and knowledge exchange work that we want to do. That can be really tricky without delegated funds to do that, or dedicated funds to do that. And always, we're having to look externally. It's not always the case that we can go back and keep asking for more and more and more. So now that I guess the planning has shifted to how are we going to now be self-sustaining fully, show excellent cost recovery, but then start to build in income as well, so that we are a beneficial producing part of the university as well.
Cool. So what I want to do is almost take the opposite perspective. And many of you obviously work with centres, but Jeremy kind of represents kind of an embedded RSC, working in a group, or working as an embedded RSC fellow. Can you answer this question in terms of how does funding or financial backing, or the lack thereof, actually affect the development of your strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think to pick up on the point that Katie made, I mean, I think sustainability is the huge challenge there. Obviously, where funding is mostly focused on grant money, and people are generally people who are on soft money, who are on fixed term contracts, whatever, in that research side of the community, it's really difficult. I think you can obviously, any plans that you make have to have a major element of kind of risk attached to them, in the sense that you never quite know obviously where you're going to be in terms of funds and in terms of numbers. And of course, when you've got a central RSE team that is supported through central funds, that does provide you with some kind of support for activities around the RSE space, or other aspects around infrastructure and so on. But then there's always going to be, I think, certainly from my side, plans are always going to involve people who are based in that research community, and many of those people are going to be people who are not underwritten permanent academics, but people who are actually working on grants, on research money. And I guess part of the plan focuses around ensuring that you give people the training and the expertise and the skills that mean that they are best placed to do that work well, which obviously puts you in potentially a better place to be able to obtain the funds that you want going forward. But that doesn't necessarily mean, obviously, because there's always uncertainty with these things, that you will get that. So I think it's very much a combination of having a plan, a sort of idealistic plan that will get you to where you want to get to, understanding at some level the amount of risk that's involved in managing the opportunity to get the funds, which are clearly hugely important in supporting that, but then also including within that plan the ability to provide the skills, the expertise, and the kind of knowledge exchange opportunities that mean that the people that you're working with and the people that you're trying to support have the best ability to get the funding that you need.
Cool, that makes a lot of sense. So the question coming from Kim, and I think I'm going to direct this to Oz, because it's essentially, you've been running a centre for a very long time. What's different with the strategic planning on how you continue to make the case for a centre, so continue to keep it going into the future? How do you choose the projects and partnerships? Is it that you're trying to keep a high-profile partnership going, or you're trying to make the host uni look good, or is there something deeper than that?
So I think this may be coming on to that part, a little bit of discussion for tomorrow about supplier relationships, right? But I'll be on a train. So maybe the thing is, how do you sustain over a long period? I think when you start your strategy is always thinking, 5 to 10 years out, right? And that's what you're looking for buy-in over that kind of period of time. So fundamentally, to keep that going, you've got to keep your community moving. Ultimately, that's kind of what it is. Keep your community on board. The real challenge comes with it over that period is when you realise that some of your, what I've termed, and others around me I'm sure have termed the same thing, princes, the key movers in your organisation that have allowed this to happen, that have driven the deans or the VPs or the CFOs in the direction of supporting research in this way, because you never do it on your own. There's always you and your posse are all kind of thinking around the same way, and that group of people actually, they change over time, right? And that's actually what you've got to pay attention to, that they're actually changing over time. They'll either leave the organisation, or they'll, God forbid, retire, or other ways, but actually keeping that posse still kind of aligned with the same types of people in it, and by types I mean the same people who carry the same kind of weight in the organisation moving forward, is actually how you maintain that. Also, I think periodically you have to. I don't think you ever need to really revisit your strategy. I haven't had to revisit it in the kind of depth that was required to create it in the first place. I think the last strategy, really significant strategy exercise that I was part of, was a 10-year strategy, and I think the strategy is still going on 15 years later. and has not been revisited since that time. Because clearly, if it's still working for the organisation, why fix something that isn't broken? If you have to revisit it and refix it when something clearly has changed in your environment that you feel is necessary to do that. But I think, one of the key things to remember is that you're not alone. You're not doing this on your own. There's a group of people who the university are trusting know what to do in this area. There is you, there's the academics, there's the CFOs, those kinds of people all will say, yeah, this group of people know what they're talking about. It's this group I am trusting. And so long as that group is maintained over a long period of time, even with people coming and going, then your strategy will continue. It will be sustainable over that period of time. Maybe that's
cool, thank you. So we're moving into the last 5 minutes, and I want to take chair's privilege, and I'm going to ask a very hard question, slightly left field question, and I'll take the first person who's willing to try and answer this. Oz, you talked about strategy being a 5-10 year thing, and I completely agree. It's a long, it's a long time scale thing to have that vision for the future. But as I'm sure all of us are aware, the 2020s has been a decade which has been not the world's greatest decade, I have to say. With climate disasters in 2020, through to pandemics, through to war in Europe, and who knows what else might come through, and obviously massive changes needed in society to be able to...
Alien invasion on my board.
Yeah,
sorry, Chris.
But even massive changes needed in society to avert climate catastrophes by 2030. So this is a really pivotal decade for society. How has this kind of external events, that have been going on in the world, how has that changed the way that you think about long-term strategy? Or has it had any change in the way you think about long-term strategy? I'm willing to take the first person who's willing to answer this.
So I'll answer.
Yeah.
Not really, actually, funnily enough. I think, a good strategy is a good strategy. Right? And almost how the world evolves around you. I'm not saying it won't change it, but what that does is it creates opportunities for aspects of your strategy. So as I think I mentioned in an earlier meeting, the pandemic, everybody working from home, everybody being quite happy about hybrid working, remote working, suddenly creates an opportunity, right, for us to do things differently. Now, I can't quite yet see how a war in the Ukraine or an alien invasion will provide me with an opportunity to do some components of the strategy as sit in my mind at the moment. But I think, ultimately, if the world changes sufficiently for you to think that my strategy is impacted so fundamentally that I have to kind of go back to the drawing board, then something really serious has impacted it. And actually, I don't think the pandemic was big enough, funnily enough, to actually impact on a research computing strategy, personally.
Cool. Anyone else? Maybe thinking of the climate and climate change potentially impacting?
I just think these are just sort of extra factors that you just kind of have to handle, right? And it's not necessarily that it changes, it doesn't really change your direction that is the kind of core underpinning principle that brought that thing together. I think it's details, implementation, equally there's sort of internal factors, around how your organization's actually maturing with their, which brings all sorts of other challenges around kind of, the sort of the team dynamics and things like that. These are just extra variables, right? And you kind of just, nudge them and factor them into the kind of, and adapt the plan appropriately.
So there's a hand up in the audience just before someone answers.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind that you get an answer to this from the audience from somebody that is managed rather than manages people. Because one thing that I've noticed is the kind of the craziness of this decade so far has given managers and leaders the opportunity to pivot their thinking more to caring about their people and how their people are doing and feeling. And good managers have taken that opportunity and focused their attention more on their people, looking after them more. And really good managers didn't even need to because they already were.
That's a very good point, very good observation.
No, I think that is a really good point, and I'm always wondering how long that's going to last, actually. But yeah, that has changed a lot. The conversations changed a lot.
I think you
We have about a minute left. Do we have any other points from the panel or from the audience?
I could say something quick, Chris, which
Yeah.
is, I think a lot of these bad situations, these sort of crises, are there are times when you choose to do something, you change the plan a bit, but you don't necessarily change the strategy. So you knew you wanted to do something at some point, and a crisis happens, and so you turn that into a sort of opportunity to achieve what you wanted to achieve. So a sort of small-scale example, we had a couple of people leave, as they do, and for a long time I'd been wanting to turn some fixed-term people into permanent people. And so I used the opportunity of some people have left. It's fine for people to leave, it's good for their careers, but actually some people would like to have career here, but they want the long-term stability. So I got permission to make some fixed-term people permanent at a situation where we were wobbly, and it was much easier to get that quickly passed through management than it might have been at a time when we were all strong. So we use these sort of, like the pandemic, is an opportunity to make us all look after our staff better. You use crises to do what you wanted to do anyway.
I think that's a really nice positive note to finish this panel on. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody in the panel, Oz, Katie, Chris, Alan, Andrew and Jeremy. And let's look forward to the rest of today. I have to say I've been really enjoying this entire conference, even though I've not been there in person. It's been a really fantastic experience, and I think it's all of us here have been helped to do this. So thank you very much.
Good to see you again, Chris.